After the October 2019 elections, in which Mauricio Macri ended his presidency with a grueling defeat, Alberto Fernández was sworn in as president on December the 10th. By his side was Cristina Fernández de Kirchner as vice president. After 4 years, where it looked like change could be imminent, Argentina went back to square one. The new president now faces two challenges that seem more complicated to achieve than winning the Paris-Dakar rally with a Ford Model T. Number one on the list is try to get the country out of the tough crisis that it's going through, and second is to consolidate his power under the shadow of his vice president, because a new political war seems to be brooding at the core of Kirchnerism.
Por la locura de la Argentina o por la locura nuestra. Alguna vez nos distanciamos y alguna vez nos reencontramos y nos reencontramos sabiendo que no había diferencias centrales entre nosotros.
And this brings up all sorts of questions. What were Fernandez's first measures after he came to power? What steps does the new president plan on taking to get Argentina out of the ditch? Will his plan help? What lies ahead for the gaucho country?
A tainted legacy.
Yes, I know this is something politicians often promise, but you can't build a house by starting with the roof.
Muchísimas personas me pidieron que hiciera una cadena, contando el estado en el que había encontrado el país y no lo hice. Creo que es más constructivo hacerlo hoy.
If we want to analyze the task that Fernandez has ahead, we first need to understand the country he was handed. And the truth is that the situation that the new president has found himself in isn't exactly a relaxing tropical cruise, not at all. Alberto Fernández got handed one of the worst scenarios that a politician can imagine. We've already talked about it in lots of videos, which I'll leave links for in the description. But here are the 3 pieces of information to summarize this apparent race towards the abyss. Firstly, in 2019, inflation closed at more than 50%. This number is equivalent to more than 10 years of inflation in a normal country. Second, the Argentine economy is in a recession, one of the greatest economic recessions in the world, where some sectors have dropped by a whopping 10%. Third, the US dollar, which had an exchange rate of 42 pesos at the start of 2019, ended the year at almost 80 pesos in the free market. As you can see, a major, total, and absolute disaster. Because the gradualism of previous leader Macri was so gradual that some people are still looking for it. The only thing he achieved was a colossal debt pyramid, because in the end, gradualism basically consisted of the following: not cutting public spending and just making small adjustments in order to attract more investments that would make the economy grow. With this strategy, the burden of public debt on the GDP would be reduced over the years, but the debt amount itself would not be reduced. At the same time, any public deficits would be bankrolled with more and more debt. And that's exactly what happened. Public spending and debt went down in GDP terms while the public sector continued to grow. As you can see in this graph, year after year, the public deficit just kept increasing. The difference between income and expenses was basically paid with debt, which created a huge debt balloon that finally burst, forcing Argentina to once again go running to the International Monetary Fund. Basically, in the end, as many economic and political analysts have argued, the great difference between Kirchnerism and Macrism was more a matter of form than substance, because their policies were practically the same. It seems that the party doesn't make much difference. All Argentine politicians seem to share the same motto: more taxes, more spending, more controls, over and over again. And given the results, well, the truth is that knowing exactly what they're looking for isn't really clear.
If we take the resources destined to what is called social spending, we see that from 1983, when democracy returned, until 2018, the resources destined for so-called social expenditure increased by 10% of the GDP, and poverty kept growing or remained at very high levels.
You saw it with Macri. Social spending reached record numbers during the same period that poverty levels shot up.
According to the Social Debt Observatory of the Catholic University of Argentina, poverty in Argentina reached 40.8% and is the highest of the decade. These indices imply that 16 million Argentines live in poverty and 3.6 million in extreme poverty.
To give you a better idea, this country currently has 8 million workers who pay taxes to support 20 million people who directly or indirectly receive a check from the state, whether at the national, provincial, or municipal level. Obviously, this isn't feasible. But let's look at it another way. Who in their right minds would invest a single dollar in a country with such conditions? Well, that is the question that the new government is gonna have to face. But maybe you think I'm exaggerating. Well, check the analysis that the Taxpayers Association prepared. In Argentina, more than half of the price of a car consists of taxes. Specifically, on average, 54.8% of the price of a new car consists of taxes, more than 50%. And this is just for cars that are half manufactured and sold within Argentina, because if we talk about imported and high-end cars, the taxes would rise even more, as well as the price. This is why in Argentina, a high-end car can cost up to 3 times more than it would in the United States, and more than twice what it costs in the European Union, countries where car sales also have significant taxes. And that helps to explain why buying a late-model car in Argentina, like the ones found in any country in the developed world, isn't an option for everyone. But that's not all. We can also illustrate the points by looking at a typical shopping cart. According to the Argentine Institute of Fiscal Analysis, more than 40% of the price of the usual food and non-alcoholic beverages that people buy consists of taxes. At this point, the burning questions are, faced with such a scenario, what measures has Fernandez taken, and what strategy has he chosen?
Yo les pido que al pasado lo recordemos, para no repetirlo, porque el tiempo que se inicia es un tiempo distinto.
The new government's path.
Given the situation, with Argentina drowning in the third highest inflation rate in the world, with an economy that's in freefall and a huge national debt, what measures has Fernandez taken? Has he decided to end the deficit once and for all? Has he decided to approve new incentives so foreign companies will invest in the country? Well, not exactly. The new government has approved a very harsh adjustment, perhaps more severe than expected. The problem is that the adjustment, once again, doesn't include the public sector. While the private sector is going to take a considerable blow, no one will touch the public sector. No cuts to administrative expenses, or political expenses, nor bureaucratic expenses. So, what does this adjustment really consist of? Well, let's take a look at the main measures.
Los que abrazamos la causa del peronismo, que hemos llegado para ser la voz de los que no tienen voz, para darle derechos a los que no lo tienen.
First of all, they're raising taxes again. Rates are raised, withholding taxes on agricultural exports are increased. This is a kind of export tax for a very important sector in Argentina. And most importantly, the non-taxable amounts on personal taxes won't be updated. The latter, considering that the country has an inflation rate of more than 50%, is something that amounts to a huge fiscal bite for taxpayers with a lower income. But let me explain this a bit better. You see, in every country, taxes, especially personal taxes, tend to have exemptions, so if you earn less than a certain amount, you don't have to pay. Well, in Argentina, not updating this minimum, considering the increases in inflation, will come as a tough blow to many people. Imagine, for example, that a freelancer, a professional, has an exemption threshold of 1 million pesos, so everything he or she earns above that is taxed. As inflation sits at more than 50%, imagine that this professional's income last year increased by 30% to 1.3 million pesos. The professional is actually poorer than the previous year because his or her income has increased less than the rate of inflation, so they won't be able to buy as much with the greater amount of money. However, on top of this, taxes need to be paid on the 300,000 pesos as they exceed the exemption threshold, which means the take-home pay is even lower and buying power is weakened even more. Well, that's exactly what's going to happen in Argentina. Higher tax rates and a non-updated minimum tax threshold mean more fiscal pressure. But it doesn't end there. Another group that is really going to feel the adjustment is retirees. Given the high inflation rates, the Macri government established a kind of semi-annual adjustment so that pensioners wouldn't lose so much purchasing power. While the new president has decided to freeze that update for 180 days for all retirees who earn more than $250 per month. And of course, given the enormous inflation that exists in the country, this will mean a very significant loss in purchasing power. In other words, a harsh blow to the wallets of retirees. That's not the end of it. Personal property tax, which is something like a wealth tax, has also been raised. And hold on, because in Argentina, the law considers everyone who has assets worth more than $30,000 to be rich. It's pretty crazy. But perhaps out of all the recent measures, the most controversial one is the new policy regarding the dollar. Fernandez's government has imposed a 30% surcharge for all people who want to save in dollars or who simply want to buy products or services abroad. This is known as the solidarity dollar. That way, even though the official exchange rate is at about 60 pesos per dollar, if you want to buy dollars to travel abroad or to import a camera, the exchange rate applied to the transaction will be over 80 pesos per dollar. If you want to travel, invest, or buy things abroad, then you have to pay for the privilege. That's just the way things are. As if this weren't enough, the amount of dollars that you can buy is officially capped at $200 per person, so if you want more than that, you'll have to exchange your money on the streets in the black market. But let's take a moment to think about all this. Even though, in principle, companies aren't affected, imagine a small Argentine professional who exports products worth $10,000. When this money enters the country, they will exchange it at the official exchange rate, which is 600,000 pesos. Now let's assume that that same professional wants to use that money to buy some equipment in, say, Germany, which costs $10,000. Well then, he has a bit of a problem, doesn't he? When he goes to exchange his money back to dollars, he'll get the solidarity dollar exchange rate, which is 30% more expensive, so his 600,000 pesos will only get him $7,500. And not only that, if he wants to go ahead with that transaction, his company will have to go to the black market because he won't be able to buy more than the $200 at the bank. So here's the question. Do you think that this is the best way to attract investment and grow businesses? Well, it really doesn't seem to bode well. It's true that with these adjustments, the government is sending a clear message to the international markets that Argentina wants to pay, will pay its debts, and therefore will be able to renew its credits and even obtain more international financing. But the problem is that if it doesn't touch public spending and only punishes the private economy even more, Argentina runs the risk of drowning completely. This is not an easy situation, that's clear. But hey, maybe politicians could start the adjustment by setting an example, right? Check out the calculation that Roberto Kaczynowski developed based on the 2019 budgets. Take a look. Anyway, that's how things stand in Argentina. Alberto Fernández's government has begun his mandate with some harsh adjustments that follow the Argentinian tradition. Could it be that Argentine politicians don't know any better? In VisualPolitik, we'll be keeping an eye on how events unfold. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please do hit that like button if you did, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos. Also, please do check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. Also, this channel is possible because of Patreon and our patrons on that platform. Please consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear even more of my lovely voice, you can join us at Reconsider Media. We have a podcast at reconsidermedia.com/podcast. See you there.